Welcome back. The Gary Sutton Show on a Monday morning, Columbus Day, here on WSBA. Glad to be with you. Also glad to be with this next gentleman, Joel Sears, president of the York County Taxpayers Council, a member of the York Suburban School Board, and a Republican committeeman from right here in York County. And he joins us here on the Gary Sutton Show about this time every Monday morning. Good morning, Joel. How are you?
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
I am doing quite well. Thank you for asking. And what's on your mind today?
Well, last week we talked a lot about education, and you left me with a challenge.
Okay.
You asked me to look into the all-charter option that's being proposed for York City.
Yes.
And it looks like there's some waffling that might be going on there. I think there was a fairly well-defined recommendation by the recovery officer, that's David Meckley.
David Meckley, right.
To go to all-charter. And last week he kind of backed off that a little bit and said, well, maybe we should try a hybrid approach. So I'm not sure the dust is actually settled on that, but there's going to have to be a decision fairly soon in order for anything substantial to be put in place for the next full school year. So the clock's ticking on that, and frankly, these things are all managed by deadlines and milestones that are established by the state. So I looked around the country, and as luck would have it, there was a report very recently on NPR that got my attention, and that was about what happened in New Orleans after Katrina. As you know, the whole city was in an uproar.
Absolutely.
And in order to try to put something back in place, one of the things that was chosen was the public school system. It was in a shambles to begin with, and they thought maybe this is an opportunity for us to take a good hard look at the public schools in the New Orleans area and do something positive with them. So as a result, their state came up with something. It's actually a state-level school district that they call the Recovery School District. In the New Orleans area, what would be called the Orleans Parish, there were roughly 65 to 70 schools in place prior to Katrina. Today, 16 of those are operated by the Orleans Parish School Board, and 50 are operated by the Recovery School District. So that's probably about as close to an all-charter model as you're going to get.
Okay.
That's sanctioned by a state-level body. Now, what's interesting about this to me, Gary, is that with all the time that this has been in place, the performance, you take a look at the charts if you want, most of the stuff is available online, has either been flat or it crested and then started to drop off again, which is not explainable unless you look at it as a cynic and say, well, maybe at some point everything was oriented toward tests to try to get test results to move up in relationship to where they were and with respect to other school districts in the area. And then as that sort of petered out, things fell back to the level that they were. If you look, for example, at the performance in the Orleans Parish School District itself, and I like to look at high school performance because we graduate seniors. We don't graduate.
This is more this is the public funded side, right? The Orleans Parish.
Yeah, this is what would have been the traditional school board with its 16 total schools. I'm not sure how many high schools, but their high school performance, 71% good or excellent, as opposed to 47% for schools in the recovery school district, and this is after 8 years in operation.
Wow!
So there's still a huge gap, and really not a very encouraging trend. There are a couple of grand experiments going on here in the state. One of which is in Philadelphia, and I call that a grand experiment only in terms of the magnitude of it. The Philadelphia school district is in a shambles by anybody's objective evaluation. It's been bankrupted by a number of factors, not the least of which is just the simple fact that they don't have enough money to even provide what you might consider to be an adequate amount for their students. But even worse than that, Gary, is the way it's spent. The other one's right here in York. You know, we've had probably the second or third highest number of charter schools of any district in the state of Pennsylvania for years now. And again, performance is anemic, to say the least. If you look at the typical charter school in Philadelphia, York, Pittsburgh, Allentown, you name it, the typical charter school performs at or below the performance in the home district from which it was created. And that's the fact of the matter.
Now, what's interesting on that for me is that I would think that in a charter school where you are competing with other charter schools, now maybe this is where I go wrong right off the bat, but where you're competing with other charter schools, wouldn't you be competing for students by having higher levels of performance?
Well, you would think that, Gary, but I'm looking at this thing from the standpoint of all the three hats that I wear. I've got the Taxpayer Council hat on, I put the school board hat on, and I think put some Republican committee hat on, only to look at it from the standpoint of what's going on in the political arena. There's such an incredible amount of politics that's been intermingled with, or let's say kneaded into the dough of public education, that it's almost impossible to pull it out. There are so many favors that are being done in the political arena, and Republican, Democrat, Independent, Conservative, Libertarian, you name it, this is no place for politics. Public education should be as devoid of politics as anything you can imagine, but it isn't.
Well, it's and the reason is precisely it's an extension of the state. I mean, it's an extension of politics, be it on the local level sometimes when you get access to grind by people who are on boards, present company excluded, and I've seen that firsthand as a teacher, by a government wanting to get their hands in there, like the federal government, which has no business having its hands on education anyway. Thank you very much, Amendment 10 to the Bill of Rights that was violated. By states that want to get in there, by unions that want to politicize it and at the same time take advantage of it for political reasons and get their right people in to protect their jobs. So, I mean, you're seeing a whole lot of hands on that for all the wrong reasons.
I agree with that. Now, the latest twist, you probably followed this one, the $2 a pack tax on cigarettes that was just implemented for the Philadelphia district.
Right.
That's supposed to, the estimates are that will generate $90 million a year. That is roughly the entire budget of the York City school system. Another $90 million. And to encourage passage, and here comes the political aspect of it again. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that we agree that the Philadelphia school district was underfunded.
Okay.
Whether we believe that or not, let's say that's the case. That standing on its own then should have been enough to justify something to put more funds into that school system. Whether it was a cigarette tax or an additional $2 on the toll bridge, on the Ben Franklin
right.
Bridge, or whatever, something dedicated to get some more money to that school system. What did it take to pass it? Well, we had to have a little provision that allowed for the charter, the potential charter operators in the Philadelphia school district to go to the state to get them to reconsider the charters that were rejected by the Philadelphia school board.
Wow.
This has nothing to do with public education finance, but it was a little dangle that was done so that law would pass. So now there's going to be a steady stream of charter operators going to Harrisburg to appeal their charter revocations and their charter turndowns, to open more charters up and therefore funnel off more money, therefore taking more money out of the public system and putting it into the charter system. It's just unbelievable.
So the charter,
this is how these guys think.
When you go back, just for people out there that are kind of wrapping their minds around this, so the charter school system, I mean, just from pureness, what was it supposed to be? I mean, it was supposed to be an alternative for people who wanted to get their kids into maybe a better education, more competitive education, more higher tech, was going to take care of some of the deficiencies that the public schools had in their particular area, particularly in urban areas. We're seeing a lot of that. And so am I defining this as far as what it should have been? And then what it has become has been kind of the local place where you can go, maybe not pay as much. I don't know. I guess you're still paying the taxes for the public. Or are you? I mean, what has it become? Am I right on what I thought it was supposed to be in the beginning?
Gary, you're right. It was supposed to provide choice. But in addition to that, it was supposed to provide
quality,
a laboratory for experimentation.
Okay.
In other words, you could come out from under the heavy hand of the school code and operate under a charter. And some of these charters are so minimally defined, when you look at it, you think, what in the world is this all about?
Yeah.
But that was the idea. Take the shackles away from the charter operators. Let them innovate. Let these little laboratories develop. Let's find out if there are some good ideas, some practices that might be applicable in the public system. They would find their way in simply from competition, at least in theory. If the kids that went to the public school or to the charter schools did well, the public school officials would scratch their heads and say, well, gee, maybe we should implement some of those practices and we'll get the kids back.
We're talking with Joel Sears this morning, president of the York County Taxpayers Council, member of the York Suburban School Board, and also Republican committee member of York County. Here's the problem I have with this experimentation thing. I remember back in the early 1970s when I started to teach. And we were just coming out of and still had a few vestiges left of the open classroom and all the various things that people were doing, team teaching and all these different things. And, some worked to some degree. But, it was an experimentation. I wonder how much carnage there is, how much collateral damage there is in terms of students not being able to learn while we're experimenting with the classrooms like this. And yes, maybe we get some good ideas, but I wonder, do we also get some bad things happening to these kids that they're not getting as part of their education that may hurt them as adults down the line?
Gary, I think we do. And unfortunately, these experiments are things that create lifelong damage.
Yeah.
Now, if you and I decide we want to experiment on the best way to grow grass, we might wreck our beautiful green lawn for a season.
Right.
But we're not generally going to poison the soil so that we can't have grass again for the next 5 years, or the next 6 years.
Yeah, so my point is experimentation based anywhere along the line on some educational fact, some tried and true kinds of things that have worked, and maybe adding some new pieces to that? Or is it based on, I'm going to start my school, people are going to like coming here, it's going to be a nice place, my charter says we're going to do some things, but we'll keep it out there, make it very nebulous and very open, so we don't really have to nail down a whole lot of specifics, and it just becomes a nicer, better place at which you can fail as opposed to the place you were failing before?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of that's true, Gary, but a lot of that's untrue in the sense that we really have a mosaic in the public school system. It's easy to say the public school system is failing. It's easy to lump everything into a very broad generalization.
And I'm not doing that right now.
Critical or hyper supportive. And as we look just in our county, we can see a complete spectrum of performance, of excellence, of failure. You name it. If you want to find it, you can. You don't have to go very far.
And I'm not one that's painted with a broad brush here, but I am saying in situations where you do have a failing school, where you have concerns about a school district like York City, for example, that you want to make sure that the alternatives are better than what has been, there before. And I'm not sure that's the case right now. I don't think a lot of people in York City are sure that's the case right now. They're trying to figure it all out.
Well, they're trying to figure it out, and they're struggling. And you can bring all these factors that we talked about before into play. There's a huge political component. My opinion is that the York City Education Association has become one of the biggest impediments, even though they would stand up and say it's for the kids. Well, it's not for the kids if you've promised to take a cut in pay and benefits and then reneged on that promise. That's not for the kids.
So I want you to continue expounding here a little bit on my challenge when we come back, and we're talking about charter schools, public schools. Well, wait, we go. Oh, by the way, if you're paying for a charter school, do you still have to pay for your public school? We'll ask Joel that question when we come back right away here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Joel Sears, president of the York County Taxpayers Council, member of the York Suburban School Board, and also a Republican committeeman from York County. So my challenge went out to you last week. You've answered it very well so far, I might add. But regarding charter schools versus public education, first of all, do charter school people, if they invest in a charter school, still have to pay their taxes to the public school?
Absolutely, Gary.
Yeah.
Simply stated, the charter schools are public schools.
Yeah.
You've probably seen the billboards around the area that talk about the free education from the cybers. And there are a couple of them that advertise pretty aggressively. PA Virtual is one, PA Cyber is another, and they talk about one of their catch lines is that it's tuition free. Well, here's the way it works. Your home district spends X amount of money per student per year to educate them, and that's an all-inclusive cost. I'll just use Suburban as an example. It's about $16,000 now.
Okay.
That includes
per student
like
per year
cost, debt service, any number of things that are really not part of the core academic program.
Okay.
What the state does is they take a form of our financial statement, and this applies to any public school district, and they pull out of that what they think our direct educational cost is for non-special ed students and for special ed students. Those are the amounts that are paid to the charter schools. So if we lose a non-special ed kid to a charter school, we write a check literally for $11,000.
Wow.
Now, I'll give you a simple example. We have a charter school operating downtown called the York Area Regional Charter School.
Okay.
York Academy Regional Charter School, sorry. And their application, which was probably 4 to 5 years ago, they projected costs, which, by the way, cannot be considered when a charter application is being evaluated. You cannot look at cost. You can't use that as part of your decision criteria. You can look at it, but I'm sorry, whatever it is, it is.
Why can't you consider costs?
I'll tell you why.
All right.
In their case, they projected a cost of $8,000 per student. $8,000 per student. They knew that our reimbursement rate was $11,000 for regular ed, and are you ready? $25,000 for special ed kids.
Wow.
So if they got one of our regular ed students, they would collect $11,000 from us. If they got a special ed student, regardless of need, it wouldn't matter if this was a student that needed 1 or 2 hours of learning support a week or somebody who was profoundly disabled, they'd collect $25,000. And now we're kind of getting into the weeds on all these so-called reform efforts that are being bandied about in Harrisburg these days. But in any case, that money comes from the home district. How do they make it up? Well, supposedly they make it up through efficiencies. If you let's take an extreme example. You take an entire school and turn it into a charter school. Well, in theory, every penny of cost of that school goes to the charter system. The cost of the building, the cost of the faculty, the cost of the curriculum, all of that goes with that school. If it's a charter school that follows the typical formula, the salaries of the teachers are going to be cut by 20 to 25%.
I'm going to say they're going to be down quite a bit, yeah.
They're going to be down quite a bit. So you would think there would be an immediate savings. Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does.
The problem is that typically they don't go that way. It's 20 kids here, 20 kids there, 30 kids here, 30 kids there, spread across a multitude of different grades and geographic districts and the like. So let's just say that your school loses 15 kids this year. What are you going to do to make up for those costs? A couple of 12th graders? Well, the 12th graders, they wouldn't go because they're just about to graduate. So maybe some 10th graders, a handful of 6th graders, and some students that would have been in your kindergarten system opt out and they go to the charter system. So you have these costs spread throughout your student population. There's almost no opportunity for savings, but there's a big opportunity for cost because every one of those kids, 20, 30, 50, 100, however many there are, take that tuition with them. That causes something really weird to happen. You still have the same number of kids in your in your system.
Yep.
You just have fewer in what are called the public schools. And all the way to the extreme worst example of all. Here's York City with 7,000 kids that they're responsible for, 2,000 of whom are in charter schools now, with a charter school bill of $28 million a year.
Wow.
There's no way they can find that economy in the public system. So what does that do? For those same 7,000 kids, it costs to go up, not down, up.
And you know what's interesting, as you do that, you're still leaving behind. You're not. It's not like you're closing down a classroom and turning the heat off in there, or turning the air conditioning off, or you're throwing out the computers that were left behind, or anything like that. I mean, there are a lot of things that are affected by those kids going out there and what's being left behind. And we're going to have to save that. I'd like to continue this conversation next week because I think it's fascinating. I hope you do out there as well. Joel, thanks so much for taking the time with us this morning. We were going to do it again next week, so we'll look forward to challenging you again. How's that sound?
Thanks, Gary.
All right. Thanks so much. Joel Sears, president of the York County Taxpayers Council, with us here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA.